Hey guys, it's me, Jeremy John with Kokanee Kid Fishing. We're tackling information, come together to get you guys in the game. Today's seminar, we're going to be going over advanced techniques. So this is a little bit of a different seminar. And probably for some people, these techniques you probably don't need to use. And a good example of that would be if you're fishing in a lake by yourself and you're only allowed to catch 5 fish per person, or maybe you and the wife are out, so you're only allowed to catch 10 fish for the day. But for me and my wife, especially fishing up at Odell, we're allowed 30 fish per person. These techniques come in really, really handy. And a lot of times when I come into the cleaning station and people go, man, how'd you catch so many fish? And I try telling them, hey, you can't compare yourself to me. And part of the reason is when I'm out on the lake, I'm kind of a machine out there. And my 2 philosophies for being able to do this is you can't catch fish if your rod's not in the water. So that's my number 1 rule. And number 2 is you can't catch fish unless you're in an area that has fish. So we're going to go over those 2 principles. Hopefully you can take what you want out of this, and hopefully it'll help you guys either get off the lake faster or be able to catch more fish when you're up at the lake. So let's start with the first principle, which is you can't catch fish if there's no fish in the water, which is pretty simple, but a lot of times people, they don't think about this, and they do some things that I see on the lake often, and part of the reason why they're not catching any fish. So number 1 is make sure you do your research. Research is super important before you go out on the lake, and I say this over and over again, but if you're fishing a lake that has poor or bad fish quality or not very many fish, you're going to have a bad day on the lake no matter what. So make sure you're doing your research. There's tons of information out on the internet, on social media. You can call people. So just make sure that you're absolutely 100% doing your research, understanding the lake that you're going to fish before you go out, and it's going to make a huge difference in your fishing adventure when you're going out. So number 1, make sure that you do your research. Number 2 is take your time to find the fish before you start fishing. A great example of this is up at Odell. If you see me, I base out of Odell Lake Resort, which is on the east end of the lake. And most people, when they're fishing that lake, start out in the West Bay, no matter what. So they take their boat, they go out to the West Bay. There's going to be a ton of boats down there, and they're going to start fishing. What I like to do is I have certain spots on the lake that I like checking out, my favorite honey holes. I turn my electronics on, and I go to spot 1. Which in this case is right outside the West Bay in the drop. So if I'm looking for fish, turn my fish finder on. If I'm not seeing fish, then my next spot I like going to is the view spot, or the viewpoint, right next to the freeway there. So I take my boat, I have nothing in the water, I'm just looking for fish. I go back to the viewpoint, turn my electronics, they're on, I'm looking around, seeing if there's any fish. I'll look in the flat, I'll look off the drop off, no fish, go to my next spot, which is over by Serenity Bay. I check that area out, and sometimes I'll even go a little bit west, keep my electronics on, no fish. Then I go off of the ledge by Princess Creek. I'm looking for fish. Sometimes that can be a really good spot. No fish, then I end up going over by Breezy Point. There's a nice ledge over there from Breezy Point to the resort. I'm looking for fish, and worst case scenario, if I don't see any fish, the last spot that I want to go to is the West Bay. And part of the reason is there's just so many boats over there, and I hate fishing around boats. So if I'm marking fish in the east end, I'm going to stay down there because I'll have the whole place to myself. There won't be anybody there, and I'll have a great day of fishing. And lots of times I'll start off, I'll mark a bunch of fish in that area, and people go, hey, I didn't see you on the lake. Where were you? Did you fish today? And I'm like, yeah, I fished today. And me and John ditching from the resort, we call that the bathtub. So I'll tell people that, hey, I'm fishing in the bathtub. So when I start my day, I don't just get on the water, throw my gear in, and start looking for fish, because it's going to take you forever to locate fish on the lake. I'm cruising around looking for fish on my fish finder, and then once I find the fish, then I start dropping my gear down and start fishing. And this can take, maybe 15, 20 minutes, but if you're in an area and you're fishing and there's no fish, again, you're not gonna catch any fish. So finding the fish on the lake is super, super important. And this is where having higher end electronics come in super, super handy. And if you know me, I'm a Garmin guy, so I've got Garmin electronics. I know what I'm looking at, and I can be for sure that I'm fishing in an area that actually has fish. So take your time, first thing in the morning, go around the lake, find out where those fish are at, and then you can start attacking them. After that, a big mistake that people make is if the fishing's slow, and this is another good thing that happens up at Odell, is people will have a tendency to gravitate around crowds. So again, the West Bay, everybody sees that the people are fishing down there. Everybody goes in their brain, hey, there must be fish down here, otherwise there wouldn't be so many boats. And so even though you might see an area in the lake with a lot of boats in it, they might not be catching any fish, but everybody's just gravitating to that area to thinking that because there's so many boats, that's where the fish are at. So rule number one, just because there's a lot of boats in a section in the lake doesn't mean that those boats are catching fish. And the West Bay is a great example of that. And a lot of times I'll be out on the lake and I can almost count if it's been an hour and then all of a sudden you start seeing boats start separating. Usually they end up heading east. I know that the fishing was really bad in the West Bay. So locate your fish, and remember, if there's an area with a lot of boats in it, that doesn't mean that that's where the fish are at. So I prefer finding the fish and possibly fishing in an area all by myself if I can, because it's me. A lot of times people will come by, and check out and see what I'm doing, especially so a lot of times the crowds will end up following me. And another rule for this is once you find the fish and you know that you're locating fish, don't leave those fish to try to find fish. Last year was really, really difficult, probably one of the most difficult years I've personally had, and I know a lot of other fishermen have had up at Odell. The fish were pretty scarce, but once you found a pot of fish, if you stayed on them and kept working them, kept switching through your gear, finding out what they wanted, you would have a good day of fishing. But people would come up and ask. I had a week up there that the fish were right out of Gull Point in this one little section over there, and they were just stacked in like cordwood. And people would come by me and I'd be like, hey, the fish are all right here. And I'm just gonna keep cruising this area. They'd make like one pass and then they'd leave. There's no reason to leave fish to try to find fish. Once you find out where those fish are at, your next objective is to figure out what the secret is comparatively to scent, speed, color, action, to get those fish to bite. And once you get them to bite, then just keep gutting through those schools. So rule number one is you can't catch fish if there's no fish. So make sure that you take your time. Don't just go out on the lake, throw your gear in, and start cruising around trying to find fish at a really slow troll. It'll take you forever. Take your boat and just start hitting sections in the lake, especially if you know the lake, and try to find out where those fish are at before you start attacking them. So super, super important. If it was me and I was on the east end and I put my gear in and I just started trolling around, it would take me forever to get to the West Bay, and by then, the wind might pick up. So I'm cruising around the lake trying to find out where those fish are at before I start deploying gear and going out and attacking them. The next rule is, and I say this all the time on my boat, is you can't catch fish if your rod's not in the water. And there's a few things that I see people making mistakes, and some tips that I'm going to give you on how to keep your gear in the water as long as possible, so that you can catch fish with that. So first thing is, if you're fishing gear and you want to switch it out, and I see people doing this, they take their rod, they'll pop it off the downrigger, they reel it in, they take it out of the water, they get in the tackle box, they pick out what type of dodger they want, then they pick out what type of lure they want, then they bait it, then they switch it, and then they deploy it. On my boat, I always have everything pre-done. So I've got my thing that I want to switch out. I got my dodger, I got my lure, rod's still in the water, I bait it, and then I'm getting ready to switch it out. And I'll pop it off the downrigger, I reel it in, I clip it back in the water. So that is super, super important. The other thing is, a lot of times when I'm fishing and I'm gonna do a switch out and I'll pop the downrigger off, I've got my setup all ready to go, I reel in that presentation and I notice that the top corn is missing on that presentation. I didn't see that bite. So do not switch that lure out. Rebait it, deploy it, and let it set a little bit longer. And a lot of times it'll get hit right off the bat. Maybe you didn't see that. So don't switch a lure out if the top corn's missing. It's a real key point that a kokanee's hit it, because a kokanee will usually swap at that top hook. So if I am planning on switching out a gear and that gear is missing the top corn, just rebait it and deploy it. 9 times out of 10, that's what they wanted, and I just missed it. They might have hit it while it was going down. I might have gotten the presentation down and I was retightening up the line on the rod, and I might have missed the swipe. So do not swap a lure out if the top corn is missing. Put that back in the water, and most of the time that's what they wanted. So, but just having your presentation ready to go, where you just reel in the rod, clip it off, clip the new dodger or the new lure out, or if you wanted to use the same dodger, having that presentation ready to deploy is going to save you a lot of time in the long haul. So maybe it might be 30 seconds, it might be a minute, but that minute over time will add up to half an hour to an hour where a presentation isn't in the water. So you can't catch fish if your rod's not in the water, and I say it all the time. The other thing is speed fishing. So this is a technique that my wife and I like using, especially if it's just the two of us on the boat. It is super effective. We have 4 downriggers on the boat, so I've got 4 rods fishing. And what I do is, once I find out what those fish want, I've got 2 rods set up and ready to go. So if my wife's reeling in a fish, as soon as I net that fish, I take her rod from her. She's got a rod ready to go on the deck. It's deployed and back down at the water depth, usually before I can unhook that fish, throw it in the cooler. So if you think of it, if I wait to, my wife catches a fish, I get it, I'm trying to get the hooks out, I throw the fish in the cooler, maybe straighten out the hooks, rebait it, give it back to my wife, it goes on the downrigger and goes down, I'm probably losing somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes of non-fishing time per fish that we catch. So that really adds up to a lot of time where your rod's not in the water. So speed fishing, especially on a lake where you're able to catch 30 fish per person and you've only got 2 people and you're only fishing 4 rods, comes in super effective. And again, if I catch a fish, I reel it in, Deb nets it. As soon as that net leaves the water, I hand her the net, the rod. I'm grabbing a rod, I'm deploying it. It's back down in the water before we can even get the fish in the cooler. And if another rod comes out, you know, that we just let that set, get the fish out of the net. That one's getting netted, and I've got a second rod that I can go out, go down. Then we can rebait, reset, and get ready to go. So you're doing speed fishing. The other thing is 2 rod endorsement licenses. I see this a lot with people that are only fishing 2 people, where they're only using 2 rods. By all means, you've got 2 rods that aren't in the water, extra rods that aren't in the water, that could be catching fish that you're not using that. So the more rods you can put in the water, obviously the more fish you're gonna catch. So get that 2 rod endorsement. It was a little spendy this year, but it's well worth having those extra rods. You can get through your gear a lot faster by putting out different types of presentations, so you can dial in your tackle a lot faster. But speed fishing comes in super handy. Another thing that people don't think about is if you're fishing multiple rods on one downrigger, so let's say you're stacking 2 rods on a downrigger, is what rod that you pop off to get your gear down at a faster rate. So let's say I have, I've only got 2 downriggers on my boat, and I've got 4 rods. I've got 2 rods stacked on each one. Let's say on my right-hand side of the boat, my bottom rod gets hit, and we're reeling in a fish on that. And on the left-hand side, my top rod gets hit. The question is, what downrigger should you take down first? If your bottom rod gets hit, you're gonna have to clear your top rod first, bring up the downrigger, reset everything, and then go back down with the gear. So that one's gonna take the most time to get back into the fishing zone. If your top rod gets hit, you don't have to pop your bottom downrigger. So what happens? Top rod gets hit, you reel in the fish, you got your other rod, you're putting it out. All you have to do is bring that downrigger up, reel up the bottom rod, which is a lot faster, put it in the rod holder, clip your top rod, and you're right back down in the water with 2 rods. If your bottom rod gets hit, you're gonna have to clear the top one. So that one's getting off the clip. So now you've got to clip 2 rods. So in that scenario, just knowing that it's a lot faster putting your downriggers down with a top rod being hit than it is a bottom rod being hit is gonna get you in the water a lot faster. And remember, you can't catch fish if your rod is not in the water. The other thing is, this is a really cool tip. If it is your bottom rod that gets hit and it's your top one that you have to pop, a lot of times I see people will pop that top one and just reel it straight in. Don't do that. So what happens is that rod possibly is at 60 feet. A lot of times I'll pop it, stick it in the rod holder, and let that slowly come up through the water column. And a lot of times I'll hit a fish with it, so you'll catch a fish. It's still fishing. If you reel that rod in really fast, it's not fishing at the proper speed, and you're not gonna catch a fish. So if it is the bottom rod, I will reel the bottom rod in, get the fish off, take my spare rod, throw it out, pop the top rod, let that rod slowly go up through the water column. A lot of times you'll catch a fish with it. Bring the downrigger up, hook up the bottom rod, go down 10 feet, which is normally my stacking distance. Reel the one up to where I can see the corn, then put it back out, clip, and then go back down. But letting that rod slowly rise up in the water column, a lot of times you'll catch a fish. And at the end of the day, when I'm done fishing, what I do is instead of popping all the rods and reeling them all in really fast, I go really slow and methodical. So what I do is I've got my 4 downriggers, I'll pop 1 rod, let it go up in the water, let it sit in the holder, reel up my downrigger, unclip my weights, unclip my flashers, get the downrigger set, and then finally reel that rod in. And what happens in that case is a lot of times you'll catch 2 to 3 fish, you know, that you wouldn't have caught if everybody's popping rods and reeling them in really fast. Go slow when you're doing that. Remember, if your rod's not in the water, you're not gonna catch any fish. Another little tip, a trick that I wanna talk about, and this is really, really important if the fish are a little bit lethargic or they're not really wanting to hit your gear, is knowing where your gear is in the water to make turns or speed up or slow down your motor. So this doesn't work real good long lining because your gear's way out back behind the boat. So if you're long lining, I'd tell you to do 30 degrees all the time. When you're using downriggers and you know that you have a certain setback, like maybe you've got a 15-foot setback or a 20-foot setback, if you go on your screen and you're marking a big school of fish, what I normally do is wait until I know that school of fish is in my gear. And at that point, making a 30-degree turn, possibly slowing the motor down, possibly speeding the motor up, will aggravate those fish to hit your gear. So you need to actively watch your screen, know where your gear's at in the water, and then make those movements, turns, increase speed, decrease speed to get those fish to hit your gear. And this will come into play too if you have a fish and you see the rod gets hit and then it quits. A lot of times they haven't taken the corn off of the hook, and a lot of times what I do is I'll make a 30-degree turn. Maybe I'll make a turn, you know, to where that rod's speeding up, and a lot of times if that fish is still following your gear, you know, they'll swipe at it, you'll get the hit, but they're still following your gear. Making that 30-degree turn instead of just popping it and reeling it in real fast to check your bait, a lot of times it'll get hit again. So make sure you're not prematurely reeling in that rod. Make sure that, you know, you're waiting before you pop that rod and bring it out of the water, because once it's out of the water, that fish is no longer following your gear. So if I see a light tap, a lot of times they've swiped at your lure, you know, maybe they've hit a dodger, they've hit the line, something's happened. And at that point, kokanee have a tendency, they just keep following that gear. It's aggravating and you're pissing them off. So if your presentation's in the water, fish is moving around, it swiped at it, you saw your rod hit, a lot of times just taking that boat and speeding that gear up will be just enough for them to hit it again, and you can bring in your fish at that point. So making turns at strategical times, speeding up, slowing down, finding your fish, and having everything set up so it's in the water as fast as possible makes a ton of difference over time. You got to think, if I'm saving a minute per deployment, maybe 2 minutes per deployment, I'm fishing, you know, for 4 or 5 hours, you know, you're getting hits, you're getting strikes. It really adds up to a lot more fishing time on the water than what people think. So knowing what rods to clip off the downrigger in time, which ones are going to be faster to get down, all these things add up to more fishing time in the water, which in turn add up to more fish in the cooler. So when somebody comes up and goes, "Oh my God, how'd you catch so many fish?" You know, it's a lot of work, but in turn, you're gonna have a lot more fish. And I tell people, don't compare yourself to me. I mean, I'm running around the boat, figuring out what rods are going down first. You know, we're speed fishing. It's not for one of the guys that wants to go out and have a nice relaxing day on the lake where they don't really care how many fish, you know, they catch. My dad's a perfect example of that. You know, he likes eating a sandwich. Maybe he'll only fish one rod at a time. You know, he's having a beverage, really doesn't care, you know, how many fish he catches in a day. He just wants to be out on the lake, you know, have a nice relaxing time. Great example of this would be, I went fishing with Bernie up at Detroit Lake the other day, and we just had a great time, had a beverage, we were smoking a cigar, wasn't speed fishing, you know, we caught some fish, but, you know, having the gear in the water, it was a nice sunny day. It was a great day of fishing. But if you really want to catch your limit, or you really want to have an opportunity to catch a lot of fish in a day, these tactics are really, really going to help out. And I don't think people really think about it very much. So hopefully this seminar helps out. Remember, we've got some great tackle on Kokanee Kid Fishing. We just upgraded our website. It's a lot easier for checkout. I just got a report today that up at Lake Roosevelt, I don't know if you guys have been watching Lake Roosevelt, but there's some absolute monster fish up there this year. I'm super excited. I'm planning on going towards the end of June. I've heard of some 5-pound kokanee being caught up there already. So it's one of those ones that's on my radar. Again, doing my research, but the paint twisted hoochies have been working really, really well up there. So they're on my website. If you go to my Facebook page, I just did a post with a couple fish that were just caught up there with a link going right to the website to pick these up. These are an absolute awesome lure. The ones that they're using, the hoochie is actually glow, so I like using a UV light, charging that up, and then just making sure that the squid is squished down on the propeller makes a lot of difference too. But we've got some great tackle on there. Right now we're running a 15% off, and that will be going all the way through the end of the month. So take advantage of it, get geared up, and hopefully we'll see you guys out on the lake.